trying to figure out what we got here, but it is ancient Greek, and I'll let Blaine tell what it is that yeah, he wants to look at it.
Okay, so
hold on. So he hasn't seen this in person before. He just seen the pictures of it. So now he's holding it for the first time. So, and for the guy who wants to remain anonymous that found this and brought this for you guys to see, thank you. And okay, Blaine, hit it.
Thank you. So Terry put up a video a couple years ago now.
Yeah.
And had a little video about this object, which, as he said, was found here in the Uinta Basin. And I guess the fellow who found it told you that folks had told him they thought it was a chocolate. That would be Spanish for chocolate horror, basically. As Terry says, it's kind of silvery looking on the inside and kind of copper on the outside. Yeah, it's like, or it's corroded or something. And in fact, we talked on the phone with this fellow together once, and he said, I suppose his buddy took it and cleaned it, which is really a bad idea. Bad idea. Don't ever clean an artifact.
So yeah, he did. He let a buddy of his borrow this, and the buddy wanted to see what the inscription said better on it, so he cleaned all this silver stuff off the outside of it, and it really made him mad. So anyways, okay.
Yeah, you ruined it. So anyway, that guy ruined it. So I actually have a degree in ancient Greek. I'm not really a researcher per se, but I did research this a bit. So when I first it's cutting out. Okay. When I first looked at it, it appears to say in Greek characters, I'm just going to transliterate what I can read. It says Geo, Rios, Apostolis, and then it has some weird combination of letters. It took me a while to figure out, oh, yeah, okay. Pravutas is how I read that, which when I look at the Geo Rios, that's not Greek. Geo is Earth, or it could be related to Earth, obviously geography, etc. But the Rios part, I thought that was a Spanish last name. And then as I got looking at Apostolis, that could be a first or a last name, and it only comes from the mainland. In 1900, there were 3 Greeks in the whole state of Utah. Short time later, they brought in Greeks as strike breakers for Bingham Copper Mine. And they actually built a town called Greek Town out there. I think there might still be an area for that, but anyway, they also brought them later in to do mining here in the Uinta Basin and down in Price. And there were 2 of them I found that were killed here in the collapsed mine in the basin. 26 were killed at Castle Gate, along with 2 of my ancestors that are relatives. They weren't direct ancestors. So there were quite a few Greeks. Looking at the metal, again, we don't know quite what that is. We're going to find out. I thought it was aluminum, but holding it seems pretty heavy to be aluminum. Maybe it's pewter. So, but with copper coating or something. And so as I read the inscription now, because the Pravutas really confused me, it looks like one word, or no, 2 words at the end there, but I'd never seen the Pravu together. It's an MPR combination. Turns out in modern Greek, unlike ancient Greek, they have replaced the sound the B makes, the beta in ancient Greek, which they now pronounce as a V sound, with MP. So that's a B sound. So what that really says is, as I realized looking at it, they forgot, whoever wrote this forgot to write Georgios. So that is the word George. And that's where we get the word Georgia. It all has to do with a farmer and agriculture. That's what that comes from. But it's a name just like in modern English, George. So Georgios is really Georgios. Apostolis is the last name. And as I read it, Pravutas means well done. Now I contacted 2 native Greek speakers. One had a kind of convoluted idea about it. I thought he didn't have the MP. He called it La Frutas, or something like that, La Frutas, which has to do with light, also meaning well done. But he did not think it was a modern thing. He thought it was pretty ancient. I don't think so. The other person thought that it was Georgios Apostolis and then a last name. But the problem is there's a B, and she didn't read it as a B. It's clearly got to be a B, a beta. So it would B sound, bravo, bravo. It should be bravo. And by the way, bravo is an Italian word that only came about in the 1600s, late 1600s, and appeared in modern in English in 1800. I don't know when it entered Greek, but based on when the Greeks showed up here, I'm pretty sure this is something that a Greek miner lost. That's my take.
So he didn't know I was going to put him on the spot here. So is this an ancient Greek or is this a modern Greek?
So they use the same exact alphabet, but the cluster of words tells me the bravo, that could only come from modern Greek. MPR is not ancient Greek. That's the sound B, bravutas. So it's modern.
So I just wanted to say that he says it's modern, it probably is modern, but I know there's stories in the Manti area, Manti Canyon, that when the pioneers came in, they found ancient Greek writings, ancient Greek columns, ancient Greek stuff. So some say the ancient Greeks were here. So modern, I don't know, but I would like Greg to shoot this and tell me what's on the inside and what's on the outside. Oh. Well, how about right there? That's the same stuff.
Right, let's see. Modern or ancient?
Let me hold this. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. He says, keep talking.
So what's your guess?
Which story? I came to my senses, man.
By weight, what do you think that is?
Copper. Copper, but it's coated with something.
Apóstoles in Spanish is apostle, and Rios is river.
Yes.
Is it spelled the same?
The question is, apóstoles in Spanish, that's an ES, not an IS, in Spanish, means apostles. Apostolos would be Spanish for apostle. By the way, the name in Greek, it means someone who is sent. And Rios is, in fact, a last name. So initially, I thought Geo was a short form of Greek Georgios, and the last name was Rios. I thought we had here, because of the chocolatero thing, I thought, oh, well, maybe we've got a person named George Rios who was on a Spanish expedition. Maybe he was a Greek, or maybe he was a Greek understanding priest. But why write in Greek on a mug? I couldn't figure that out. And it was really that combination of NPR in Greek. It's just not an ancient word. It's not an ancient phoneme. It doesn't occur, in my experience, in ancient Greek. So it has to be the BR sound. The MP sound by itself just doesn't come at the beginning of a word in ancient Greek that I'm aware of. And I looked for that quite a bit. So I think I think the person who wrote this was maybe the first time they ever wrote an inscription. And by the way, the Greek capital letters are meant to be inscribed. That's how they developed, from writing on stone and metal. So there's a lot of straight lines. They're quite rectilinear, you'd say. And all the letters on here, with the exception of the U, which in Greek, ancient Greek letters would be written with a Y kind of symbol, straight lines. lowercase Greek is written with the same Latin U look that we are used to. But this is a very big U. I think the person was not well educated, whoever wrote this inscription. They left out the A from Bravo. It should be MPRA-B in modern Greek. Oh, Bravo. But in like Brazil, I know there's an area where they say the O on the end is a U sound. I think somebody was from an area that spoke Greek with an ending of an O as kind of a U sound. And they weren't well educated. They had letters, but they weren't well read. And so they just wrote what they heard. And that's why we ended up with this inscription as it is.
All right, so it's showing about 12% copper,
So did you do the tin part or the copper part?
the tin on the outside.
Okay.
So I don't, so it's something that the machine isn't calibrated to read, that it's reading.
So like it's some kind of an ancient concoction.
Could be, it's just not something, something that this is calibrated to read.
So it's not really reading good. He's trying it again. Geez, I had a great thought. I do. So when you're tracking down this ancient stuff, when you're tracking down this Spanish stuff, you got to have a whole team, because I'm not smart enough to know this. I'm just a daggone electrician, man, who likes to search for things that are out of place or stuff like that. So you have to have a whole team of people that can help you. And sometimes I don't like what they say, but they're the brains, and so you got to go with what they say. So with that, Blaine, man, I think and we're going to get a copy of this because he's doing a paper on this for us, so that and I'll have him be doing a video for me saying what he really thinks this is. Greg says it's some kind of an ancient concoction that his gun ain't reading. Well, we'll let the gun see.
Thank you.
So that's weird. So now on the part that looks copper, it's showing 127% copper with some lead.
Is that possible?
No,
Man, this thing is alien. It just broke his machine.
Hey, Greg, can you read pewter? No. I'm guessing it's pewter. Pewter with copper cover. That's just by the weight. I don't know. It feels too heavy for aluminum. And what's pewter made out of? Tin. Tin. Huh? I can read tin. And I don't remember the other thing.
So he's asking if this thing will read pewter, and pewter is made with tin and this thing will read tin. This thing's streamed this machine, man. This is a $30,000, $40,000 machine that's throwing it out of what, man? This is one of them UFO space things. This ain't Greek. This is ancient alien inscription. Pewter's a tin copper alloy, so this should read that no problem. We're gonna give it another shot because this is crazy. This ain't right. Yeah, this hasn't gone like this all day.
Was it molded with the handle on, or does it look like the handle was molded later?
No, this is all handmade. It was added on later. The handle was added on later. What do you think, Robert? You're into checking all kinds of things out.
looks strange to me.
There you go, from the expert. Hold on. Wow. Okay.
The same thing on the silver shiny part here. It's just showing 9% copper and selenium, potassium, calcium, but I don't know. It's weird.
The copper's not showing too much.
No, but where it's coated with copper, it shows a lot.
It's coated.
Yeah.
It shows too much.
Yeah.
So,
Try it again.
so
I got your solution.
what's your solution?
It's an ancient artifact of unknown metal written on in the modern day.
It's alien.
I'll tell you what I noticed, Harry. I noticed from looking at the symbolism on it, the patterns, they're awful reminiscent of the Michigan artifacts, where a lot of the North American copper originated to begin with. And I mean, really reminiscent of that. So you can see a lot of the forms around the banding, around the top, the letter symbols, even the artistic rendition on the side. You know, when you look at how artists have traits, you know, each artist can be told by their lines and you can recognize this from that. This to me really, really seems to go in season with those type of artifacts. Something else, it looks like whoever did it out of flat sheet copper. It's not symmetrical and it's not even, which means the sheet probably wasn't even square when he started. And you can see that the entire form, there's no even spot on the entire form. So it doesn't even look like it's made necessarily by a craftsman who did that as a trade. You know, early on, your craft was your life, and you learned how to do this type of metalwork, and you went to produce fine crafts. But if you were in a strange country or somewhere without all that infrastructure and without all that, that's what this looks like. It's someone who did their best attempt to create, you know, a fine wares out of what they had, native materials. So.
Hey, Greg, a question. If there was a pottery glaze kind of fired over this metal, I got it.
If there was a pottery glaze put on top of the metal, would it read well through that?
No, it would throw it off because it only goes down about 1 millimeter. And yeah, so could be, but it looks like it's been.
So it was all this tin color on the inside and the outside. And when he let his friend take it and borrow it, he buffed all the tin part off and down to the copper, which really made him mad.
Pewter is tin, 85 to 99%. Antimony is 5 to 10%, and copper 2%, I think it says, and silver. And bismuth, yeah.
I'll have to look at the spectrograph and see what elements is on there that's not showing up on my calibration.
You had silica there, right? You had silica in?
No,
There wasn't any silica.
nope. Selenium.
Selenium.
To be continued, man. No, a guy found it here in the Uinta Basin, buried. So we're going to do some more research on that, and we'll do a video about this. So that was a quick stall trying to get the thing working. We still stalling? Okay. Somebody asked me, hold on, let me get rid of this. My ghost story? I had somebody that was asking me about, they want me to tell the ghost story, but because I got an update to that, but that's too long. So I had somebody asking me, I did a show on the History Channel with Prometheus on Beyond Oak Island. Anybody see that? Couple people? So I had a few people ask me what's going on with that. So last year, for those that didn't see it, I had 3 brothers that went down into the glory hole up on Hoyt Peak. It's known as the Lost Josephine mine area. They didn't know anything about the Lost Josephine mine. They went down this natural cave shaft. It's 50, 60 feet down to the bottom. They was lowered down on a rope with a winch. And they explored this thing all day and they got lost in there. And their flashlights was dying, and they didn't have any more batteries, and there was 3 of them. So they shut all the batteries down, all the flashlights down except for one to try and preserve, because when their flashlights are gone, they're done. They're history. And so while they're down there trying to find their way out, they found this wooden door. And Tom described it as this thing was an elaborate, he hadn't seen craftsmanship like this before. This door was 8 foot tall, 7 feet wide. It was arched, and there was no cracks in it. It was tightly fit out of thick hewn. He says the only time he's seen a door like this is on the old shows with the castles and the dungeons and that. But they didn't have time to explore it, and there were some old tools sitting outside of this door. But they was trying to get their way out. And Tom had his flashlight on. His brothers didn't. Well, he shut his flashlight off. He knelt down and said a prayer and said, God, help me get out of here, and I'll never come back. And he stood up and turned his flashlight on, and it hit the ceiling, and there was an arrow carved in the cave wall that pointed the way out. And so they got out, and Tom, true to his word, he never went back. Neither did any of his brothers. Well, I found out about it years and years and years later, and made a deal with the mine owner up there on Hoyt Peak that, we tried to go down there and find this door. And then I made a deal with Prometheus, the History Channel, and we went down there and shot. And Tom wouldn't go down there, so he described to me. I'd go down there and I'd video this place, and then I'd try and get him to see if he could recognize things. It just wasn't working out right. But what he described, man, we went down with the History Channel and doing some thermal imaging and all kinds of things. We found an area that looked just like what he said, but it was caved in. Well, after that show aired, his brother seen it, and he said, I never made that promise to God. I'll go down there with you. So last year, at the end of the year, we went down, and I showed him the wormhole we went down, and he started down that, and he says, we never went this way. I promise you we never went this way. So we came back out, and we went, he says, it's over here to the side. Well, there was a big slough and a cave off right there. So we started moving some dirt out of the way, some boulders, and started excavating, and as we had our head way down, because the ceiling was real low, moving some rocks out of the way, we noticed some writings on the ceiling. It was numbers and letters written with a candle or a carbide lantern or something. Took a picture of that, showed Tim and Tom, and they sent it to their phones, and they was looking at it. They was driving home, and they remembered that on their way when they came out, they was on their back going through the wormhole they went through. They was on their back, and they remember looking up at the ceiling and seeing that writing. So we know we're in the right area. Then we got snowed out. That was last year. This year we couldn't get in till July 15th because of all the snow we've had this year. We've getting up there. We're doing some excavating. We're still waiting to see what's happening. So stay tuned. We're looking for this door. I don't know what's behind this door. If the waybill up there talks that there's $1 billion worth of gold and silver bars behind this, is this something more ancient? Or I can't imagine the Spaniards building something like that. And the way we went down there, there's no way that they could get the lumber down that way to build it there. There has to be another entrance, but it's covered up, caved in, something. So stay tuned, man. We're trying to find this door, and that door itself is a treasure. So how we doing? Okay, we're getting close. Just looking. Can you guys see this screen all right? I know it's kind of small, but it's better than yesterday, I'm sure. In the back, can you see it all right? Kind of? Mick, thank you.
Jerry, do the giveaways. They're on top of the podium.
How am I doing these giveaways? I don't know anything. Whatever I want. I'm going to let John do the giveaways because he's got it figured out. You know what? I do have a giveaway. But this is for the people that are close here to Salt Lake. How many know what Fan X is? Anybody else live in the Salt Lake area? So Fan X was gracious enough to donate us 4 tickets to Fan X on a Thursday. And so, for those people that are from Salt Lake and would like to go on that, and I don't remember the date when this is, but it's on a Thursday. For those that want to, would like to go to FanX, a free ticket, I'll give them in pairs. There's 4 of them. I'll give two pairs, 2 and 2. So stand up if you think you'd be interested in going on FanX on a Thursday, and stand up. Okay, so in fact, all of you come up here that would interested in going. Come on up here. And I appreciate FanX supporting us. You know, little old us, you know. I've never been to FanX before. I went last year, and it's crazy. All them people there dressed up in cool, elaborate costumes. You need to go just once to see it. So this is for in Salt Lake, and I don't know when FanX is.
It's usually September.
It's in September.
We got our picture taken with Daisy, Luke, and
That-
Duke.
There's a lot of stars there that go to this FanX.
Really? Seriously.
She says she got her picture taken with Daisy Duke and
Bo and Luke.
Bo and Luke. Cool. So, all right. So I only got 4 tickets, but I'm going to give them away as 2 and 2. So I can only have 2 winners here. So how many we got?
A whole bunch.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Pick a number.
You got something I can write on?
I'm not listening to theirs, but in some.
Okay. Pick a number between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Pick a number between 1 and 11.
8.
Hold on. I'm not going to keep track of this. Just point. Okay. Remember that number. 5, 7,
3, 2,
2,
8, 4,
4,
6.
6,
1.
1, 2, 10.
2 2s and 2 8s. Missing.
It's all right. We got a winner. John, hold that number up. Number 4. So get with me. Give me your name and number. Write this. You got a piece of paper?
It's my birthday.
Hey, write your name and number down and your email address and all that, and I'll get with you. Okay, that's for 2 tickets. I got 2 more to go. So let's do this again between 1 and 10, and hold on. Pick a number there, John. Okay, you keep track of everybody.
8. Still.
7.
7. Pick another number. 5.
10.
6.
9.
1. 3.
4. 6. What do we got, John?
5.
Who did 5? He did do that 5. Okay. Write your name and number down here. I know how to get a hold of you guys. Write it down anyway. And I will get with you guys and get your tickets. How we doing? We getting things? Let me go get the clicker.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. So can you guys out there see this screen that's up here right now? Can we see anything on it? So mid crowd says mid. How about you guys in the back? Is it visible at all? Mid. What was that?
I said it's tighter in the middle. I said, can you able to move it to the right a little?
Oh yeah, I'm sure we could probably slide the device over. So our deal with it being the size that it is the farther we move it back from the screen, the dimmer it gets. So let's see, yeah, parallax.
Hey, I just want to say that I appreciate you guys coming out. I know it's been hot. I know, man, that the conditions haven't been great for showing this stuff, but Man, I hope what you've done here is rubbed shoulders with everybody else here, because there is a lot of great stories here, a lot of great information here, a lot of great minds here. And where else are you going to go to meet people that have similar interests, you know? So I appreciate you all coming. What's that? He says he appreciates me, you know? It ain't me, it's all the guys that I know, and I know a lot of great guys, and thank you guys for watching and listening and that. So we close. I don't know. Is it in there?
Well, I'm going to take this time to thank everyone for showing up as well, and thank these guys and the coordinators, of course, for having me up here. They invited me up from New Mexico to speak. So they're micing me. And I got to say, I've known of and known Terry since about 1990. A lot of people didn't even have the internet yet. We were already filling up the cyber world with everything we could. He's been one of my greatest followers overall, and someone who's really paid attention through the years of the phases as we've changed things and gone through. And they've taken a great development and turn. So I know I'm here today to speak about Bigfoot, and that's what I'm going to do. And I've been requested so much of that today that we're going to go ahead and show you a presentation solely on Bigfoot that was created on the ecology and behavior of the species, a little bit about the DNA, and then the question about basically why you don't know what you don't know so far. I started out in the ancient history and treasure hunting and recovery field back in the late 1990s. 1998, we found Coronado's winter home, and it went on from there. But through the years, you know, you get good taste and bad taste being the good find. So when you find something big, it usually goes haywire. All this time working in the rough country and back in the backwoods and the places where nobody gets to go, these are the places where big things are hidden. It's often in areas that would take your life to trying to get access to them. Well, this also happens to be where other things hide. And these things can range. They can range from cryptid creatures, they can range from off-world entities, potential ultra-terrestrials and other things that share this planet with us, of course, that most of the mainstream doesn't necessarily want you to realize. It just complicates things, let's put it that way. So throughout the years, doing heavy exploration work and doing it as well for agencies, private individuals, from the government to academia, often when they didn't want to touch anything that they had to write down in a book, they would call us. And during these adventures and during all these excursions, we often encountered Bigfoot. Now, we weren't chasing them, we were looking for them, and often, or most of the time, we were so busy, we didn't have time to pursue them. And so we didn't. They became a fact of the environment. They became one of the things out there, and we weren't out there to discuss it or debate it with anybody. Our understanding about the species grew and grew. And then in 2010, I have to say, well, in 04 and 05, we found a big one. We found a treasure, and it was a big one. And it became big problems. By 07, 08, things had gone sideways, and I was left with very bad taste in my mouth, being the finder and the knowing party and the excavation company doing the deal. Finance companies don't often agree with you, and things can go sour. Well, it left such a bad taste, as I said, that I was looking at the Bigfoot world when the YouTube started and got involved. And what I saw out there was like basically kids in a Bigfoot costume on a quad riding around the backyard eating an ice cream cone. And then a couple of, you'd see a good thing here and a good thing there, but most of it was just total spook. And I'm thinking, hey man, we see these things, we've encountered these things, they're real deal. Look what the world's finding out with the development of the multimedia being in everyone's hands, and this is what people are saying. So like ancient history that had been hidden from us that I realized throughout my entire life since childhood, this was just another example of the same thing. Here's a reality out there that's wondrous, it opens doors, it opens your mind, it changes the outlook of how we see our world, which reflects on everything. And yet, what are they doing? Where is it at? It's being seen as a spoof and a joke. At the most, the pros that seem to have respected the field of Bigfoot and the species, and they're still misleading the people. So what did I do in 2010? I said, well, heck with it. I just kicked the treasure thing right to the side because I was basically being utilized for my talents, my ability, my equipment, my methods, and my team to make everyone else an awful lot of money. Now, even though we got to be involved in the excavation, recovery, and often the documentation of things that are amazing and beyond belief, it still left a bad taste in my mouth because we couldn't do anything about it to change the narrative, to change history, to change the way everyone sees these things. But Bigfoot is something I could, so I did. And one of my team members, Doug Wright, he's often here in the Vernal area and the Shade area. He asked me on the phone one day, he says, what in the world are we doing? I saw you just put out information on Bigfoot. Doug's treasure hunter. And I said, well, that's what we're doing now. He said, all right, boss, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. So basically my team jumped in as much as they could. Now we had a diverse array of talents, probably had 40, 50 people overall between medical examiners, hazmat, OSHA, MSHA, and everybody else involved in our projects. So certain ones didn't get in, but certain ones did, and they fell in pretty deep. So we applied all the methodology and methods and equipment, team, talent, and we applied it to the Bigfoot enigma. And in very, very short session, we began to make groundbreaking discovery and things that just, it almost seemed like divine intervention because just who in the world could fall in the middle of it this deep? This is what we believe. In 1994, I had filmed a massive male Bigfoot, and we were on a treasure site, and we were actually where we weren't supposed to be at this particular time, checking an anomaly given to us by satellite. So we were jogging in about sundown, and this thing was on a mesa looking at us, at about a half mile. And I want to say that most of this stuff is on our YouTube channel that I'll be talking about. I guess you're welcome to go see it and get you the information. But needless to say, so I filmed that being, and I encountered him for a solid 8 months that I was on that site. I didn't leave basically the site at all during the entire time. And so I got to know him in a weird way, vicariously, by his advancement through our project almost nightly. And then over an 8-year period, each one of my crew as well had encounters with this same subject, and we did as well as a group. One of these encounters was we were going out one night and we were using a trail to get out. We never used lights, and what you do to follow a trail in the dark is you just go for the light path. So you can kind of get an idea or an area of where the trail would be through the dark, and that's how we progressed. And we did it all the time, same trail, it's no big deal. Except one night when we entered the thickness of the trees, the darkness of the trees, instead of seeing that lighter area appear before me where the trail would be, it was solid black. And I thought, what in the world is going on? Why can't I see? Why can't I see? I should be able to see through here. And then all of a sudden, maybe 25 feet in front of us, that blackness stepped to the side. The entire thing stepped to the side. A massive area of space in front of us just became visible. We didn't hear anything. Everyone certainly made that out. So I thought to myself, I was scared to death. I thought to myself, well, I got a whole crew of guys on me. I can't show weakness, right? So I just told them to go. So we walked down the trail. We didn't know what to expect after that. I thought that would be the end of it. Well, when we came out into the trees, we saw something standing near the road on our side of the guardrail in the full moon. And it looked kind of like a tree, but not like a tree. It looked like a thick, stubby tree with a thick top on it. What it was he was stood over sideways, just like that, and his back was probably this high. And we all froze, and he bolted sideways, went over a little fence that was down below us. There was a bridge, and the guardrail was from a bridge. It was across the river right next to us. And he dove down into that thicket and made an explosive break. Just an explosion, I mean, just like a shotgun went off. And when he did, the guy behind me, big guy named Gary, a lot bigger than me, froze, turned into a ghost and just froze. And when it was over, I went on the bridge, trying to figure out where this thing went, whatever. By the time we got Gary into the car, he was muttering, "Hey, Bubba, hey, Bubba," and that's all he would say. We kept trying to get him to finish the sentence, but that's all we could get out of his mouth. And it took about 15 minutes to get back to where we were standing. Got him in the living room. We got him in the thing, actually. The guy asked, what the hell happened to him? He was pale. You know, you hear people say that he turned as white as a ghost. Gary was pale. And the bottom of his eyes were dark, and he was looking forward. And we finally got him to finish a sentence, and he said, hey, Bubba, that first break would have taken me out. And he was trying to say that for now probably 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So needless to say, in 2010, 2011, with members of my team, we started heavy research, and that culminated in being involved in the Oxford, Louisiana Collateral Hominid Project, which was conducted by the University of Oxford and the Museum of Zoology, Lausanne, Switzerland. And this was to map a collateral hominid occupying our forests, and it was to go public. Now, you've all heard of disinformation and counter-disinformation, I'm sure. This study was a double-edged sword. It was a true study. They were doing the work, but they didn't tell you the results. Matter of fact, they misled the AP, and we know because we have the letters from the director, who was named Brian Sykes, because our first submission into that sample group was found to be unknown. And they had the study open for several time period until like January. Results are supposed to come out in March. And so in January, they actually wrote us and said, we're going to hold the study. Can you get a hair off a live specimen? So it took us 2 months to do that. So we did that. And we submitted that. And that's with a hydrated follicle. In other words, 15 to 30 minutes off the subject. And this subject that we gathered that sample from happens to be the one that left this 22-inch footprint that's on the far left of this table over here. And he was an older subject. We got his bite imprints. We found 170 of his feet print that day. His hand prints found where they used a projectile to take out a deer, cooperative hunting, and a bunch of other stuff, all went with this sample in a CD. When they tested this thing, it was never released to the AP within the study. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Part of our deal at the end will address this, but I know I don't have a super long time to do this today. This is about a 2.5 to 3 hour presentation if done to a scientific group or done to a peer group. So we're going to run through this today as fast as we can and make room for the next speaker to come on. So let's go ahead and get with it. So I'm going to start this off with a quote by Sir Conan Doyle. That is, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be truth. So you understand what he's saying there. When you factored in everything else, if it quacks like a duck and waddles like a duck and swims like a duck and flies like a duck, what's the most likely thing it actually is a duck? Just because ducks don't live in that pond, you don't eliminate the obvious. And that's what we tend to do with a lot of this anomalous stuff, whether it be ancient history, treasure, cryptid animals, off-world beings, ultra-terrestrial, whatever it may be. The moment it doesn't fit the narrative, it's tossed. Science does not use scientific process. Scientific process doesn't contain bias. It doesn't contain I think. It doesn't even contain I know. It contains here's what we found, and here's what we found about it when we picked it up, when we measured it, when we heated it. This is all we know. This is not done in ancient history, in the world of treasure, in the world of off-worlders, or in the world of our cryptids. People need to ask that why. So part one is ecology. We're going to start with diet and acquisition. So one of the things we notice is a lot of the biologists run around and say, what do they eat? You have a massive animal. And I'm going to tell you right now, a large male, this is the honest truth, will go every bit of 3,200 to 3,300 pounds. This is something that biology doesn't explain is where does all their food come from? Yet you take those biologists out in the field, they don't know what to eat. Now you take a traditional Native American out in the field on their home turf, they'll show you what to eat. The biologist has no clue all the stuff you can eat. They don't realize what a hominid or a hominin will consume when it's hungry. In this case, algae and greens through the wintertime and year round even. And we find that sometimes it's just when there's no other food, algae and sand will work because it does have that beneficial protein. It has citric acid. It has a lot of things in it that we take for granted. Another thing, like you'll find in these river basins here, is Russian olive fruit. Now, this is a subsistence food. Anywhere you have Russian olive, you have the potential of having Bigfoot activity. And not only that, but you have the potential of having family groups or younger individuals not these transient subjects that most people encounter are just going from A to B or on hunting and things like that. And with a range of 100 miles every 24 hours, if they want to move, the big ones, then that's what I mean. People are going to see it and go, oh man, and then we saw a sighting, we've never had another one. Yeah, well, you wouldn't believe the amount of terrain they cover. Look how much terrain a bear will cover when it's looking for territory. 100 miles is nothing. Pinyon pine nut. Regionally, this is another subsistence food source. So when you have Russian olive in the bottomlands, you also often in those type of climates have pinyon or other type of edible pine nuts at their higher elevation. Juniper berries. This is one that most people wouldn't think about. We think of gin and things like that produced by these, but they're very astringent. But they will consume them at certain times of year. Yucca stem and base root. Okay, so this is another thing that we take for granted. You look at, there's millions of yucca throughout in Spanish Bay and other plants like that, on all types of altitudes through the Southwest USA and the Western regional. So the base of these are completely edible and they contain moisture. And I use them at times when you go do pretty extreme stuff. We're not carrying enough supplies, whatever you see when you grab and bite the bottom. And what you'll see here actually in the right-hand photo, if you can see that, you're gonna see the teeth marks of a large hominid. And with the teeth being about the same size as my thumbnail, about twice the size of the average grown male adult. Birds are another subsistence food. They get them easy. If you know where a bird roosts, you can walk up and grab it in the dark. It's like chickens. They go docile. They can't see. They'll flop around if you flush them, but they're very easily prey upon. So it just takes paying attention. And one of the favorite ones we've seen are woodpecker. And why? Once a woodpecker roosts, they're yours. If you can pop them out of that tree, they're yours. And we see where the Bigfoots have actually stuck a finger or two in the woodpecker hole and just busted the side of the tree out to get the bird. Like, it seems effortless for them. This is one that people don't expect. When hard times are hard times, it's the way it is. And the picture on the right, even though you probably can't see it, and we will throw this up on YouTube and stuff, and we'll toss these frames in so people can go back and see this stuff. But the frame on the right is scat, Bigfoot scat, with porcupine quills and skin in it, swallowed whole. This would cause extreme duress to just about any species I can think of. And they will do stuff like this. Now, deer, that's something we'd all assume that they prey on. That's an animal that, of course, you think, and they have no problem getting them. Often in places where the Bigfoots are prevalent, where they are a lot, the deer won't fear humans. This is an odd thing. You think, wow, I'd be 3 times as scared of a human being, but you got to figure, Bigfoot use stealth. When they hunt, they do so in a manner that no one ever sees them or hears them, deer included. They take deer from a herd of deer without alerting the other deer. Now, a lot of native tribes do that too, because what are you going to do? You're going to go running your game off. It's not like hunting season like we have, where you go out periodically and shoot one. You don't really care what happens after that in a sense. But if you're living on that herd, in most native regions with most populations, they're very close to that herd. They don't run that herd off. They try to keep and maintain them as best they can and not alert them to slaughter. Livestock is another one that's very important. They are opportunistic feeders. They're not all the same. Even though you could describe them as a people having somewhat of a culture, which enables them to live in pretty close proximity to humans, to modern humans, without being detected, is they usually won't mess with stuff. It's a full understanding you're going to drag it home if you go cause problems. But you will find the younger individuals doing this. And they can cause a lot of grief. And in this case, you see a cow leg bone with a hominid bite mark in the side of it and scrape. And again, it's exactly the same scale as the previous one we showed. This would come from an individual between 10 and 11 foot probably. Grubbing logs. This is another food resource. We all understand that completely as bears do it, and even other animals, even coyotes will dig a log after grubs. But they don't lift the bark or they lift the pieces of the tree up and set them down, especially lift them up and set them down next to the other section. So there's a lot of different indicators when the Bigfoots are doing it in feeding. Of course, also complete absence of any claw marks or anything like that, or even bite marks or chew marks, because they're doing it with their fingers. Something we've noticed in association with this I don't know if we have a picture of it or not, but they will use not just the grubs, but they will eat the material that the grub leaves behind. So you know that sawdust looking material that's inside the channels in the wood when you get done? Well, they'll pick that out and eat it as well. Probably because it's already been, the cellulose has already been broken down by a previous animal and makes it digestible. Digging with sticks. So this row comes up under tool use and method. Okay, so we always assume that, well, you know, they just run around, they're big monkeys and they do whatever, and that's not true. So tool use is really prevalent. Of course, crows use tools, and all types of primates use tools, and this has been shown. So a raven will use a stick to get something out of the ground or whatever. Even drop rocks in a bottle to raise the amount of liquid in the bottle so it can drink. That's pretty intelligent. So what would we expect of something that potentially could be one of our ancestors or a possible cousin? In this case, we see where the stick is still laying there they did the digging with. And there was tracks from two subjects here. And they're both known subjects to us. We have prints from them on the table because we studied this family unit for about 6 years solid. And was in with them hundreds of times during that 6-year period. So this was one of their zones that they would move in and out and do this with. So no other animal is going to physically pick up a stick and use it to dig. And there's a big difference between digging with a stick and an animal digging with its claws. You won't find linear marks spaced evenly throughout the entire structure. An animal will dig this way, this way, this way, this way, straight up and down. And so this type of digging, and then as well, you have, of course, Bigfoot feet print leading up to the event, leading away from the event. Another method is rocks for small game. Now, when we go into these bosky regions and we're in places where we know there's no people and there's no one else in there, we've been in there, we're the only ones. And I mean by that is you couldn't get in without leaving some kind of marker sign, and no human beings are leaving any sign. We often find rocks up on top of the recent forest debris. So in this case, Russian olive leaves, grass, and other things, and the rock will be sitting on top of it. Sometimes we'll go through, and the next morning when we come out, there's a rock laying there. Sometimes we'll walk through, and of course, we'll come out, and there'll be a tree laying across the trail where we just came out. Rocks for large game. This was collected when we got the 170 prints, the hair, this cast that's on the end. This large subject we assume was old because his teeth imprint were missing teeth. And the hair we got was 7 inches long and gray. And as well, he was using 2 smaller subjects to run a deer down or walk a deer down the mountain until it got to him. And he was on all fours. We got his handprints around 3 and had this rock. And this rock weighs about 80 pounds and it's granite. And it's wedge shaped, and he apparently had thrown it from his position to where the deer was, because you could see where the deer tracks came down, made a little turn in front of a bush, and then the bush was totally flattened out, the rock was laying there, and there was no more deer prints. And we searched about 150 feet away from this full circle with 4 people and never found where this rock came from. So it got carried into that location, apparently for that purpose. So now we'll move on to tracks. These are the ones where you guys are going to probably want to see some pretty good pictures later. But on the right-hand side here, I'm actually showing handprints and feet prints. And what you think, and I guess a lot of people think, or possibly, is that a hand looks like my hand, that my foot looks like my foot. And it does if I plant it that way. But if I plant my foot or my hand, doesn't matter. Let's say I do it like this. If you look at that, we can all look at the form it makes. And it makes kind of a paisley-looking form with a twist on the end. Well, if you see that in the sand, or in the mud or anything else, what are you going to think? You're not going to think that's a foot, because we're programmed to see a whole track when we look at the ground. They seldom plant their whole stuff when they're ground. They move on every bit of their surfaces. It's pretty amazing too. And if they don't want to leave sign, they can cross stuff and not leave sign. And then a true tracker Bigfoot will go in and say, hey, wait a second. What are these little divots? What are these little sweeps and things like that? They're running around on their fingertips, on their toe tips, on the edge of their foot, and moving like that. So oftentimes you'll see where they're in mud or something, and they'll step on the sides of their feet and things. They just trying not to get all into it. And speaking of that, we have tracks here where they never would have gotten them. You hardly ever see the tracks of the adults in this location. And he probably never would have, but one of the younger ones had run out of a thicket of thorns and stuff out into the riverbed. And he apparently had intersected him and took him 2 steps out and grabbed him up, just snatched him, because his prints just ended. They went nowhere, and snatched him up. And then when he turned around, big displacement, and stepped right back in his own track and went back out. And that's why we have a track over a track sitting here. So one was in, one was out. But you could tell that he made the least amount of mark as he possibly could as he was doing that maneuver to get back to juvenile. Knuckles and fists, you guys can't see this. So on the left-hand photo here, the small one is a set of 7-inch wide knuckle prints, and they're spaced about 4 feet, I believe, if I look at the tape there. So, and this is the female of this group. So that's how she stands, and her fists are countered about 15 degrees to each other. So you can imagine her on all fours on her fists, and her hands like 7.5 inches, what her across the top of her knuckles measure. Adult hand. So this hand is 16 inches long, 15 inches wide open, and my hand at 8 inches wide, fit with my fingers out, fits exactly in the width of its palm. That gives you any idea of the scale. This is tracks, and of course, you're not just going to, if it's a living creature and it's out there and they're really going around, they have kids and they have all this stuff happening, you're not just going to find deeper. What do kids do? Kids roll around like little apes, like, right? Well, what do you think these guys are going to roll around like? This is the marks from a juvenile on his knees and his hands, sliding across the sand on his knees and his hands. And he actually defecates or poops a little in the tracks. And then something comes along and picks him again. He's about 6-7 feet out of the sand, was able to reach all the way out and just pick him out of the sand. And she only left one edge of a footprint doing that. Everything else was hard pack. It was, gravelly bottom, cemented together. So this is an infant. We have his tracks when he was a little older over here on the table. And at this point, it was 4 1/4 inches. And this is the first time we saw this subject be set down by the mother where we could find any marks of it. We had found scat that was blue because of a lactating mother and the clotting of milk. So it makes the scat blue or green color, just like a human baby. We found that at the time, about the time the infant would have been born, shortly after that. But these prints were, like they were probably 6 or 8 months later, maybe even a little bit longer. And apparently about the feet were about 4 1/4 inches at that time. Toddler, 6 inch or so. So you're talking basically the equivalent of a 2-year-old, something like that, maybe. This was one that we encountered after we recorded a male killing a dog. And then we went down there to examine, because we set up big sound recording equipment, 36-inch dishes. We catch a human voice or discussion at 2 miles. And with this, we would actually track them. We knew where the riverbed system was, so we were about a mile off the riverbed, and we could hit them on the riverbed and track them along the riverbed, and then we could tell how fast their progression is and what the male was doing and the family was doing. And at one point, he had come in to the family group, apparently because there was a newborn, dogs rousing him, we tore a dog apart, and then we went down there to examine the area the next day. We didn't find much from the event other than a lot of stuff busted up, not much prints. It's all hard pack, but we did find the juvenile's prints or a young toddler's prints leading out into the sand. And these are almost comical because when you get a good look at these, the big toe structure makes up almost 30 to 40% of the foot when they're at this size. Their toe is huge for their size. And then it doesn't grow as fast as the rest of the foot relative to that length. So juvenile 8-inch standard. This is juvenile 9-inch. That print is on the table right here. This is one that we finally named George, and we've watched him grow up till his foot's now 14 to 15 inches. Here's a track an adolescent at 10. These are young, 9 and 11. So this is actually who we call George and Amos. So, and we've given them the names not because that's their names. That's just how we designate the subject from subject. Adolescent at 14 inches, and this is one of the subjects in the family group. There's about 7 in the family group. This one's larger, at this time, larger than George, and we don't know what happens to them if they get so big. After about 17 inches, you don't see them down there with the family much anymore. So here's one at 17, and on the left side is a track of my boot print, and above it is its foot. And you can see, if you can see that it dwarfs my footprint. Now this picture, Tara and I were planting a camera up at an event where people these aren't Bigfooters, these are just people that saw something huge on all fours, looked like a big monkey with yellowish colored hair, come down to the road, stand up, go back on all fours, bolt across the road and off the bottom. And then guy in the highway department says, hey man, we missing deer down there all the time. The deer that get hit on that pass, we take them down and toss them down off the road right there because it's got a steep drop. And so basically, each deer that gets hit, they've been throwing it over the side. And 17-inch subject has been coming, apparently getting those from that area. And this is where he crossed. So we went and set up game cams on that. We hit it so well, I had a hard time finding the camera. And all we got on it was activity of, and this isn't, we didn't go next to the highway doing this. We actually went in quite a ways. And where these tracks ended up being found. And the only thing we got was something was throwing snowballs into the frame of the camera. And it happened like 3:30 in the morning. It only happened a couple times. Something, well, there's a bunch of triggers on the camera, but nothing in the frame. And so, but at two frames or 2 times, the camera triggers, then you just see snow fly into the frame, and that's it. So he's activating the IR, and he's looking, I think that might have been a 850 nanometer IR. So the lower the nanometer IR, the easier it is for a hominid or for a primate to see the light. So upwards around 940, it becomes very invisible. This camera wasn't that high. You could see a little bit of glow, and I'm sure you could see a lot more glow. And it triggered that glow at one point in time, just wouldn't get into it. But he was throwing snow into it. So here tracks the alpha female. So this, we've studied her a lot. So we have photographs of her. We've scaled her using survey techniques. We've been on her prints, on her scat. We've been feet behind her of her breathing or her snoring. These tracks are 20 inches long. That's a considerable sized animal. She scales. I thought she was around 9 foot when we first took pictures and gave an estimate. And then we used survey techniques and scaled her off everything around her. She ended up being 10 foot, slightly hunched. That's massive. She was 44 inches across the hips. Now, granted, she's not near as wide as the big males are. Big males are like football players. They're huge, and they really are. And but she didn't look that way. She had the classic Venus body type in a sense, where she had large buttocks, large thighs, narrower shoulders. And at that time, well, I have pictures in the computer. I won't be able to get to them now. Maybe later this evening when we get started, I'll try to pop those out for you guys after everything's finished and we have a little time. But she's carrying George, which is in the photo. So I saw her from a mile away, down, well, right close to the mile. But I had elevation on her. She was in river bottom. And as soon as I crested and started taking pictures from that range, she picked up George and took off. And I was looking at her through a 70 millimeter zoom lens because for my eye up here, it's just a black dot. But there shouldn't be any black dots in the river bottom, period. And she's dissimilar, of course, to everything else out there. So what we do is use high-end photography, and then we're getting a lot of echo. Hello. Okay, so we use pretty high-end photography, and when we enhance those things and brought them in, we also apply what's called a vector scope, which uses certain frequencies of light, and you compare it to all the other stuff. And she can, just her, had a different frequency of light than everything else in the entire frame. You can separate her from everything else. And in these photos, they're good enough to see that she had George in her arms. And he was every bit of 6.5, 7 foot. And at that time, it was about 12 to 13 inches, and she still picked him up like a toddler and carried him on. And she did it at almost a mile. So that tells you how shy and reactive they can be, and why they're hard to find and hard to see. Now, how she even knew we were up there and spotted us cresting, it's pretty obvious, but that distance, there's an antelope, just like the only thing I could think of that'll spot you at that distance and take off if it wants to. It'll know what you are and why. The alpha male. Now this is the one, we don't have his feet prints. They're bigger than this one. I didn't have casting material when I ran into it, but it was 6 years before we found the first mark of it. And then it was years after that when I actually got to see the large prints, which were 23 inch, and I may have one. These are his though, and the print on the right is the 23 inch print. And it's odd because the toes are almost as wide, the big toe is as big as my heel. If that gives you any size of scale what you look at. So when you see these tracks, your brain doesn't even put them together, it parts them out. Oh, that's a divot here and a divot there. Your brain doesn't even want to put it together unless you can catch that shine, and that trackers know what I'm talking about. As you look into the sun or whatever, you can see leaf matter anywhere. You can see shine from whoever took a step. Unless you get that at 30 feet, and you're on top of them, you walk right over these. You don't even realize. My brain didn't even realize. I didn't spot the first set. My buddy did, and I was almost standing on it. This one, though, this print was taken less than 3 minutes after it was made, and while the subject was still 40 feet from me. The one on the left is when the first picture, the only ones we had any indication of, and the step gaps in between those. There's a 7-foot measuring stick there. The first step's 8 feet. The second step's around 9, and the next step to get out of the river bottom is over 12. And everything was frozen solid. This is about 4-inch thick ice, and he just punched right through it in every single step and cleared that last to the frozen bank and left no more sign. Okay, so foliage manipulation, and you guys might have to keep. I don't have my watch on. You guys might have to keep a time, kick me off when I'm done. So foliage manipulation is something they do for all types of reasons, and it's one of the easiest ways to track them once you know what you're looking at, what they do, and where they do it. It's not hard to find if they're in an area. This is what they'll do. So they build structures. The purpose is totally up to debate unless someone actually sees them, what the purpose would be. But they look like shelters, but they're not big enough for them. They're not big enough for the big ones. So we assume that they're stuffing kids up. At least from my point of view. But I've also found that the size that's about the biggest thing you could fit in them is a wild turkey. Now, I don't know why they're doing that. And this is one case of that. So on the right-hand side, there's a young man sitting in what is a human size. I could easily camp in this thing if I wanted to. But on the left, there's another one that, like I said, when it was together, you may have only held turkey-sized animal creature. So it's pretty straight. Sunshades, they'll take foliage and drag them off into ravines and things like that. If there's nowhere else good to get shade or if they're too hot. Breaks and twists. This is what we use as indicators to follow them in the field. And they'll take specific types of trees and twist them up. And they'll do it in a way that nothing else can. They'll do things that you or I could only dream of when it comes to section breaking. In other words, where you have to break a tree by immense pressure on 2 points very close together to get a clean snap. They cannot just do it to a 1-inch sapling. They can do it to a 3-inch tree where it won't splinter. They'll just snap it clean and it'll be totally green tree. Now, you guys, most everybody here has probably encountered firewood, encountered trees, and understands the durability. And if you break a green tree, how the splintering occurs and all this. They'll make clean breaks and stuff like that, all left and right. In this case, what we see, we call these signposts, where they'll twist a fibrous tree, whether it be cedar or something else like that, and they'll repetitively twist it almost to death, and they'll rub on it. And this is where we get most of our hair samples from, because it'll just grab the hair. We've gone back 5 years later on the same post, it's still got the same hair in it. But you'll see where they just rub their skin and everything else, and it'll smell like mom. It'll smell like whoever did it. On the left is a sectional break, and we call these daytime breaks or day breaks, where they're occupying at the time, where the family is actually at might be a quarter of a mile to a half-mile stretch, and they're kind of dispersed in there a little bit loosely or whatever. But when they go into these areas, they'll do these snaps like this, the entry and exit points in these areas through thick foliage, and they'll do it each day they're in there. And so you can go to these entry points and look at the breaks, and if they're still wet, and they're that day, you know that they're in that area at that time. The reason they're doing it, we assume, is so that the other subjects that are transient, going in and out from the group, be it the adolescents and the older teenagers and the adults, they can easily find where that group is at that time. They can just track them right back down. Rub and scent posts, we kind of already went over this a little bit. And I want to say about these, though, when we find them, they're predictable. So I never found one. I mean, it took like 8 years. And then I found one. And then I went to the same kind of spot in another place, found another one. Then we went to Michigan, 1,550 miles, where we researched, found another one. And so it became predictable after a while where they're going to put them. And they put them at these corridors before they get into a thick foliage zone of one type or another tree. They'll take the little trees out front, something dissimilar, usually fibrous as they can find it, and they'll snap it off and create a rub right there. And it's just like a signpost in front. And often it doesn't mark exactly where you go in, but they'll do this seasonally almost, or do it every couple of weeks or whatever when they're in an area. Blinds and barriers and blinds. So they construct barriers and blinds. And they'll do it out of some massive stuff. They'll build a barrier out of 60, 70-foot trees just to hide behind. A 70-foot tree weigh anywhere 2,500, 3,000 pounds. We've witnessed, I may show some, where they utilize trees that are over 100 foot tall and over 31 inches thick at the base. And a tree that size will weigh 18,000 pounds. And where they've ripped them out of the ground, carried them into places, and set them down and stacked them up to make an area that can't be traveled through by deer or other creatures. And then it's just a total ambush zone. They can still move through this stuff, and almost nothing else can. This picture of foliage manipulation is for territory and crops. And the reason I say that is this is one picture where on the left hand of the small photo, you guys will realize this too, is a pine tree about 30 foot. And it was ripped out, straight out like a carrot. And the entire taproot is on the pine tree. And now it's set sideways where it still had all the needles and everything when it was done. And it was just set and propped in between two other trees sideways to make kind of a fence. But to do this simple little deal, hey, I just want to stack up a little fence here. This thing actually took out a 30-foot tree and just ripped it straight out of the ground. Now, how many of you have ever seen a pine tree down with its full taproot on the tree? Ever, anywhere. Now, if a bank collapses and you have a soft dirt slough and fall, you may end up with a tree hanging out of that with a taproot on it. But other than that, that root's going to snap off. It's not going to stay there. And if the tree's dead, that's one of the first things to rot out. It's right below the root zone. But you can shake the trees when they're dead because the taproot's already gone. This is fully intact and green when you pulled it out. That takes immense. The amount of strength it would take just to extract a tree like that without breaking the root is tremendous, especially when it has a curve in it where it's been growing around a rock or other obstruction. The trees on the right are in the form of an X, and this is a territorial marker or a station marker. And this is on the edge of a hunting zone. We went up into this area just to see this gigantic stuff. And there's another whole story about the lodge, and you guys can look into that. That's another big story about something we found up here that I wanted to refine. But this is an example of how big they'll make a simple territorial X with. One tree is about 90 foot, the other tree is 80 foot. So these trees are in the well over 4,000 to 5,000 pounds, and they've stood them up and put them into a perfect X in the forest. Defecation. This is probably I'd say it's a shitty thing to study, right? But it's probably the most definitive as to what they do, who they are, where they are, where they go. Now, everyone likes to have all these big mythical fantasies about what these things are, and I'm going to tell you, they're real, and they're so real they don't take any of this woo or any of the paranormal stuff to explain anything they really do. But one of the best indicators, I said, is scat material. And placement of this material is a big deal. So where is it going? So hardly any other researchers out there in the world find scat. If they ever do, it's never on a repeated basis. But once you learn where they go and how they prefer to go, then it becomes predictable. Now, we went in on this group of 7 on purpose one day to do a scat sampling and found 48 piles in one day. And it represented about 5 days of defecation for 7 individuals. But it would have been about 60 or more pounds of scat material. You know how many coyotes it would take to produce 60 pounds of scat material in 5 days? It's an awful lot. What we discovered was that they were doing it in groups. So the whole family would go together, and then they would have a subject 20 feet away, apparently maybe watching, and then he would go. Or he just doesn't like to poop right next to the rest of the family. I don't know, maybe he's shy. But that's the way they were doing it over and over and over. And they were doing it in water courses or behind thick foliage or guarded areas up against bluffs and stuff, somewhere you're never just going to walk up on them. Interpretation of what's in the scat material, again, is the most definitive trait. This single scat material had a grasshopper leg, deer fur, rodent bone, pinyon pine nut, and Russian olive seed, all in one scat. Now, it tells you a little story about what he did that day before he had that defecation. But one of the biggest things it shows us is the pine nuts in this case are 5 or 7 miles, depending on which way you go, 5 to 7 miles away from where the Russian olive are. So this subject had traveled 5 to 7 miles just during this period of consumption in between defecation periods. So it tells you what they're doing, where they're going. Plus, he's picking up You got deer somewhere, you got deer fur, you got a rodent, you got grasshoppers even. So one of the unique things, and I don't know if we're set up, I doubt we're set up for audio on this rig, or how to run it. Yeah, I don't think we are. So these were for another presentation. We're probably gonna have to go buy them. I'm sorry, but they're recorded vocalizations. If we get time after 2 and we can hook up the audio with these guys, I'll blast these things out for us. And all these neighbors can go, oh my gosh, what the hell is that? So foraging, this is into behavior now. So food. They'll move as a scattered group searching as an individual for food resources. So in other words, they'll spread out in a zone 40, 50, 100 foot apart, maybe even more, and they'll pick through what they've got, and they'll just kind of go through like turkeys do. If you ever watch turkeys in a field, they'll spread out and move through the field together, picking what they can pick. They'll gather and collect food and search without collection. So they'll, without picking in and get up, they'll just eat as they go, and as a solitary subject and things like that. They'll collect and deliver food to subjects at camp. Now, this is a trait that not a lot of animals do, but cats do it, and some others. You have an elderly cat. The older cat will actually bring it food to eat if it loses the ability. We've seen the same thing with them. The subject that was on the table here had yucca fruit, which comes from 4,000 feet below. This was up at 10,000 foot. So the yucca's down there 4,000 foot below, and it's the highest one. They're bringing yucca. Someone's bringing yucca fruit up, and he's biting it, consuming parts of it, but leaving these biting prints as an individual that's missing a lot of teeth. And our assumption, we never found any of his prints going down the mountain all the way. So our assumption was from that other subjects were bringing him that stuff up from the valley floor. So using top methods, plant animal hatch and migration. So what we have here is where you're learning, you can learn in 2 ways. You can learn through observation, and you can learn through instruction. And what we're finding, most of this would have to be learned through instruction to understand these things. It's like when the hatchings of the gypsy moths are, and which mountain slopes that they'll hatch out on. So you'll find the northern slopes is where, but in the sunny zones of the northern slopes is when the gypsy moth grubs will all be. And they go up there and flip 1,000-pound rocks and dig these things out. But you never see the flipping of the rocks or any of the activity until it's right at that point, right before the hatch-outs happen. So what it indicates is, why aren't you up there doing it at any other time? And how in the heck do you know to go up there during the hatching and get all these things out of the ground? That's not the only one. There's a lot of food acquisition stuff that we see that would most likely take instruction. So you have an older individual, or you have witnessing through food acquisition when this is. And then it's pretty tough to teach somebody when the moths are going to hatch and things like that. So they search as an individual subject for food, and they will do that. So when they get up into their older years, like I said, any a foot, 15, 18, 20 inch, they can be quite cantankerous about visiting farms for food and things like that. We believe that they're not as skilled as food acquisition as some of the other subjects. So they'll bop in and hit farms and hit different regional stuff and do a lot of food acquisition as solitary without having anyone else around them. They're not going to bring it to anybody else. So this takes us to hunting. They use cooperative hunting techniques for small and large game. We've kind of gone over that a little bit. They'll funnel and direct gear into ambush positions. So we've seen a lot where they'll run, there'll be a spot where maybe an arroyo drops down into a larger canyon, and you can't see the only way to go down through that funnel, and they'll work on both sides of the hill down there real slow, and then the subject will wait down there at the ambush point to snatch them up. And when I was with that big male that left that 23-inch print, I kept trying to go around this little corner, and every time I did, one would go to that point with me. And we call those a pinch point. And so past the pinch point, you're going to get snatched. And that's kind of over and over. Any other animal would move away from the pinch point as you approach it. And these were not doing that. They were moving toward that pinch point with me. And that's enough to really, really get your goat, I'll tell you. The funnel and direct gear activity is presence of vocal records. So they'll make noises, stepping, and reveal themselves to animals without spooking them all the way off. Or they'll do these little whoop, whoop, and do stuff like that. And they'll key the animal and get them a little edgy so they're not just standing there. And and then they'll kind of funnel them that way. So they don't want them to run. And we've witnessed them being very, very crafty about doing it subtly. But they want to keep them moving because they want to get one. So, construct, utilize sound traps, locate prey and danger. This is something that's pretty crafty. We've seen it a bunch of times. And they'll do it in different forms. So if they're in a thick zone or area where you got your family all hidden in there, they'll only be a couple of ways in or a couple of ways out. And they'll block those, even if it's temporary. And they'll leave in, one way in, one way out. And then they'll leave a back door. And often on the way that would be the front door, they'll lay down branches and make a crosshatch and then fill it full of leaves. And it'll be big enough to where I can't step over it, but the big ones can. And so anything that walks down that trail is going to step in that and make noise. We call them sound traps. And we hate them because they catch us. We won't have a way around them. This stuff will be so thick, our only way of progression will be through this. And you can't even pick the branches up without making noise. So we reveal ourselves. And oftentimes after we hit those sound traps, they do get one vocal report. Like this. And then we know, well, we're busted. So they got us. They know where we're at. They know we're in here. Build rodent small game traps, especially as nests and things. So we've seen this, and this is all we can glean from this, what's going on. They'll take a stump, natural or cut, into an open area, and they'll place the stump to where root side down, and they'll stuff grass underneath it. Now this, rats and stuff stuff grass, but it's a whole different deal when you have a clump tore off and laid in there as a clump. And we have seen where we've come back later and laid these things over, and you can see where rodents have nested in them. And then we've come back and seen them turned over. And so all we can assume when we witness that is something is making a trap. It's making an area that a rodent will go nest in. So later it's an opportunistic thing. They can check that, get something to munch. Occupation. Utilize an area for 2 square miles, 5 to 7 day period as a family group. This is what we found to be average in river bottoms, such as what we have in this valley. Utilize an own range approximately 100 square miles as a family group. So generally, once they're in a spot, they'll occupy it for a point in time, then they'll devour the resources, and then they'll move on to another zone, might be several miles down the river, whatever. And it'll generally be about 100 square miles, 10 by 10 miles area overall that they're gaining all the resources and other movement activity. They'll change, as I said, they'll change the areas as the impact grows. So as they scare the game, they deplete the resources, they'll often just bolt from that spot completely and just relocate 4 or 5 miles down river zones or whatever, so somewhere there's fresh going on. The overall range, do a seasonal migration, things like that. So what we have here is it's greatly varies. People say, well, do they migrate? Some do migrate. What's their range? It's much greater in some areas than it is others. And it's almost always around resource acquisition or seasonal changes that maybe a family unit. So it's based on needs, and it changes everywhere there are. So it's like humans in the sense that there's no thing one group of humans do. Some humans do migrate. They migrate with herds of reindeer, things like that. Others are extremely sedentary, where you have generations never leave the same valley, and that's what we see to be true. They utilize high rugged areas and treat for solitary group of large males. And this is really interesting because apparently in the group we studied for 6 years, that large male was hardly ever in there. And he did vocal reports when he came in, which may not be for several months period. Often it was every couple of weeks, especially when you would have young in there with him, he was coming in more often. But what we found was when you go into the highest and the biggest and the most rugged areas, you have sign of the largest, biggest individuals, and you have activity that we would assume goes to male activity, because they do obviously have a different order. They do have that set boundary, and it seems like that at a certain age, certain size, it seems like the big males just don't want to mess with everything anymore. They just want to go do their own thing, and then come down and visit the family every once in a while, and they'll get together. And so what we see in these big areas where I showed you the massive stuff, that's one of these zones. And these zones are considered very dangerous. On that particular trail, I'm not bullying anybody here, up to 30 people have gone missing in a single year with no criminal investigation. One of our team members who went up there with me on that trip is U.S. Forest Service, 35 years, 19-year officer, still active, still manager in the U.S. Forest Service today. He was there with me. He looked up the information to verify that information. He said that he found 37 people in 3 years is what he had found that had gone missing on that trail. Now, they've been trying to close that trail and erase this loop for a decade now. It's not on the modern maps. And most of it's closed off or off limits. And the area we found this stuff, when it hit the news and all this other stuff, and it got into Eastern Mexico University, and it got to KOAT and the KRQEs, other local news stations, ABC, NBC, the U.S. Forest Service closed this entire area. And they did so to prevent adverse interactions between humans and rare and sensitive species. Now, when you do a closure for species, there's always a number on it for the species that seeks protection, but there wasn't. And it said to reduce the chance of adverse interaction. Now, that's not impact on the species. That's adverse interaction. That means the species having an impact on you as well. And that was as far as they went with that. And then Ron, of course, Ron Castor, the USFS guy, he researched that stuff and inner office could not figure out why these closures are occurring. Of course, we know why they're occurring. So grouping, how do they assemble? So the form family unit, 7+ individuals, family, the females in the lead until daddy comes home. Daddy's gone most of the time, and it seems like the mom is the boss. And you got the, because everything, all the activities the group does as a group, it all follows around where she's going, where she's occupying. You'll never find the rest of the group off somewhere that the mother's not, unless it's the adolescents taking off at night and doing the stuff teenagers do. They'll form large subgroups of young to hunt, forage for unit, often cause trouble. And that's what we kind of say. So the adolescents will get into groups of anywhere between, that depends on how many's around. You apparently will have adolescents from different groups join together at night and go rampage around and do stuff, hoot and holler and make all kinds of ruckus. And just like in a lot of cases with the Native Americans and with the U.S. Cavalry and these guys, a lot of the massacres and stuff happened as a result of what the teenage boys were doing at night. That happened more than once, where the tribe itself would be like, hey, don't mess with them, leave them alone.